Yo, what's up? I'm excited because we are back with another ranked and reviewed the remix of the very first band that I did this for. It's been almost 3 years since I did my first ranked and reviewed video on YouTube, and that was back when this band, Trivium, only had 8 albums. But guess what? In the last almost 3 years, they've put out 2 more albums with their new drummer, Alex Bent. He's not new anymore, but he's still their most recent, and hopefully their last, because he is the shit! As of today, their newest album, In the Court of the Dragon, has been out for a full week. I've listened to it quite a few times. And if you want to see the old Ranked and Reviewed, I'm going to unlist it so that it can't be looked up by search. I'd rather you guys hear this new one. But I will put in the description or in the cards or wherever the link to the old one, because I don't want to give out repeat information. My opinions, for the most part, on the first 8 albums have remained the same. And aside from the addition of 2 new albums, the ranking did change a little bit, so I'll get into that, but I don't want to repeat everything I said from the first 8 albums in the first video, so be sure to check the description for that, in the interest of making this video more centered around their last 2 releases, In the Court of the Dragon from this year, and then What the Dead Men Say, which was the first album that I really got into during the start of the 2020 pandemic. Yeah, there's a handful of albums that were fucking monumental in making 2020 a better year, and that was one of them. So if you want to compare notes between the old video and this one, feel free. I'll give some quick opinions on every single album, but I'm mostly going to be talking about their last 2, and maybe we'll compare how the ranking has changed, and then, of course, where did the new albums sit in. So without further ado, let's get into one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time, Trivium, a band whose pretty much every single album I adore. I've loved Trivium. I'm 30 years old. I've been listening to them since I was 15. I've listened to them for half my life, and I've loved them every fucking second of it. And I've listened to them pretty consistently. Like, there might have been a few years where I didn't listen to them as much, but I have been pretty engaged with all of their releases. So with regards to Trivium, I'm kind of a hardcore fan. I know what I'm talking about, and I've seen them live, and I would love to meet them someday, because they still have a bunch of gas left in the tank. It's like they're swinging. They're like full steam ahead right now. Like they are just in a fucking golden era of their writing this far in. I'm so excited. So, and then of course, unlike my last video about Trivium, I will also give probably my top 10 favorite Trivium songs. I probably should have made it top 15, but let's keep it in theme with my other videos. Let's just do top 10. So let's go ahead and get started. Trying to make this ridiculously long. At the bottom spot, my least favorite Trivium album is their 6th album, Vengeance Falls, from 2013. So, yeah, this album just doesn't have anything excellent on it. It sounds a little clunky at times, but it does have some catchiness. It does have some screaming in it. Matt Heafy does sound good on the vocals. It's just the guitar riffs, everything's just not as high octane or as high caliber as their other stuff. The best songs on this album are the opening track, Brave This Storm, and Through Blood, Dirt and Bone, or Through Blood, yeah, Dirt and Bone, I said it right. It's just some of their weaker material. Almost every single one of their songs is above an 8 out of 10, or at least an 8 out of 10, which means they're all at least great. But my least favorite Trivium song is on this album, and that is the song Villainy Thrives. It's not a bad song, it's just my least favorite. I think Strife is a little bit of an overrated single, even though the intro was pretty cool. But, you know, there's a handful of good songs on here, but it just doesn't hit as hard as the other albums, and it just sounds kind of like David Draymond of Disturbed had a little bit too much influence on your more, not radio rock, but like maybe like light metal versus some of your more aggressive Trivium stuff. And then the closing track, Wake, isn't one of their best songs either. So that's the bottom album. Vengeance Falls, which has switched places from the previous ranking with their 9th best album, their first album, Ember to Inferno. This one used to be at the bottom, but I've listened to it a few more times, and I think this being their first release and just a few other instances about it, this album's slightly better than Vengeance Falls. So I don't think this is their worst album anymore. I think it's their second worst. But I've been pretty familiar with Ember to Inferno for pretty much the entire time I've listened to Trivium. But much like Vengeance Falls, nothing excellent on this album. The best tracks, of course, are the opening track, Pillar of Certains, Fugue, and When All Light Dies. Those are my favorites. But it's a consistent album. It's pretty solid from front to back. It's, all mostly great tracks. It kind of opens on a solid note, closes on a solid note, especially with like the instrumentals and View of Empires after When All Light Dies. But it's just kind of Trivium in their infancy. Matt's vocals haven't fully developed yet, especially his clean vocals. I mean, his scream sounds killer on this album, but it just, it just doesn't sound as great. But like for a band as young as they were, and in 2003, this is a pretty solid release, but it's just a precursor of what was to become Trivium. At the number 8 spot, we have their 7th album, Silence in the Snow, from 2015. I have a lot of sentimental value to this album. I listened to it quite a bit during the winter of 2017, and I listened to this album a little bit when it first came out, mostly that single, Until the World Goes Cold. But aside from the closing track, Breathe in the Flames, much like the bottom 2 albums, just really nothing excellent on this album. It is pretty solid, but just the lack of screaming, it makes this a unique album because it's very melody heavy, but there is some heavy music here. Beneath the Sun, fucking Blind Leading the Blind, Dead and Gone. There is some heavy ass instrumentals on this album, and I love that they finally introduced Drop G Sharp with Dead and Gone, which is a great track. You got some, memorable melodies and choruses and songs like Rise Above the Tides, and then, of course, The World Goes Cold. But I think the best track is Breathe in the Flames. I love that song. I think it's one of their best. I love the intro. I love the chorus. But I just think overall as an album, it's just kind of one of their flatter ones, but it did have more to enjoy about it than their bottom 2 albums. So at the number 8 spot is their 7th album, Silence in the Snow. Definitely worth listening to, especially if you don't like more aggressive vocals. But at any rate, still not one of their strongest albums. At the number 7 spot, which it's kind of a tie with Silence in the Snow, but I'm going to give the slight edge to their 3rd album, The Crusade. Compared to my other ranked and reviewed, these two switch spots. I used to put Silence in the Snow over The Crusade, but I've decided that The Crusade is actually better. There's just more excellent material on here. You got Entrance of the Conflagration, you got Becoming the Dragon, To the Rats, just a bunch of incredible singles there. Anthem is not one of their better singles, but it is still a pretty solid 80s anthem, especially The Rising as well, even though I know it's like their least favorite song. But I just think from where they were at in their career and how they really came out heavy with like the thrash theme, I just think this album is just a lot more cohesive, and they didn't fully ditch the screaming. Like, yeah, compared to Ascendancy, this album is not as heavy on the vocals, but it's not without any screaming. I mean, you've got Becoming the Dragon, which has a lot of screaming in it. Ignition's got screaming, or is it Detonation has screaming in it. I'm very partial to the screaming of Matt Heafy. That's why that kind of plays a huge role in which albums are among the best or not. But just the guitar work on this album is insane. The thrashy elements are awesome. And there's just more excellent material on this album, so that kind of elevates it above Silence in the Snow. I just love the theme. I love kind of like in the mid-2000s, how there was like a callback to 80s thrash metal, and it's just really fucking awesome. That's when I saw them live, was when they were touring this album, and it was a pretty damn good show. They opened up with To the Rats. All right, we are pretty much at the halfway point now. We have another two-way tie here, but I'm going to give the slight disadvantage. I hate this, but I'm going to give the slight disadvantage because we're getting into like the really fucking incredible Trivium material now. Their newest album, In the Court of the Dragon. when I first listened to it, I thought it was going to be lower, but I was like, dude, this is probably another concept album. A lot of the songs are longer. Give it a few more listens and it'll probably grow on you. And that's what happened. And The Court of the Dragon is a awesome album. I think they did a great job. The turnaround time after this compared to between Sentence and What the Dead Men Say, definitely a lot faster. It's a longer album at their kind of like standard 52-minute mark. There's only one excellent song on here, which is from Dawn to Decadence, but every other song is like a high 8. So that's kind of why it sits in the middle. It's because from front to back, it's just a pretty solid and consistent album. And Matt Heafy's vocals sound incredible on this album. Musically speaking, I don't know if it's one of Alex Bent's more incredible drumming performances, but here's the thing about drummers. You shouldn't expect rapid fire machine gun drumming that's just technically absurd. I say that as a compliment on every single release. Sometimes drummers want to slow it down a little bit and kind of play with a little bit more feel. I'm not saying that there's not any fucking incredible drumming on this album. I would just say that maybe Send in the Sentence or something had better drumming, at least to my preferences. I think Trivium has gotten a lot better, and they are in like their best years right now because they found their fourth member. So every member played their part perfectly on this album. It's just I don't think I particularly love the guitar tone. As catchy as In the Court of the Dragon is, songs like that and Fall Into Your Hands, just the guitar tone is just a little too crunchy for my taste, but the melodies on this album, the songwriting, the themes, the overall sound, it's incredible. I love Crisis of Revelation. It sounds like an Ascendancy callback because of and by Ascendancy I mean the actual title track. Similar key, but it just sounds like it. Great melodies and songs like Feast of Fire, Shadow of the Arbitoire, great vocal performance from Matt Heafy there. I love the build-up. I love the melodies. Fall Into Your Hands is another great, memorable chorus. Phalanx, which was written during the Shogun era, sounds like a modern-day Shogun song. Let me just say this about The Court of the Dragon. It sounds like Shogun, a little bit of Silence in the Snow, and Send in the Sentence had a three-way and made this Court of the Dragon album. So I think they took the best elements of some of their best albums and put it into this. And it is very enjoyable to listen to. I'm very happy to be a Trivium fan right now, and I am still currently enjoying it, but I think I've listened to it enough to say that it sits pretty comfortably at the number 6 spot. Right in the middle. Best songs are Crisis of Revelation from Dawn to Decadence. Phalanx is incredible too, and so is Shadow of the Arbitoire. But just the opening couple tracks, Court of the Dragon, Like a Sword over Damocles, and then Feast of Fire are also pretty solid as well. So that is the first half of this ranked and reviewed. On to the second half, we have their number 5 album, which is technically tied with Court of Dragon, but I'm going to give the slight edge to Shogun. Because I listened to it the other night after listening to Court of the Dragon so many times, and I realized, holy shit, Shogun has aged incredibly well. And it is the most sentimental album to me from Trivium. Shogun was a major album for me my senior year of high school, and I just think this album's aged really well. I still tend to hear new stuff that I haven't heard before, but just as epic as In the Court of the Dragon is, Shogun just kind of has the slight edge, especially being only 4 albums deep. Shogun just has something about it that it's that same level of like consistency, but there's a couple of peaks of excellence that weren't available in Court of the Dragon. You got songs like Throes of Perdition, Like Callisto to a Star in Heaven, and then of course the fucking closing track, Shogun. That 12-minute masterpiece is not 12 minutes too long or 7 minutes too long. It is exactly as long as it needs to be. It is a perfect closing track, and there's a lot of sentimental value to the melodies. Okay, this wouldn't be a Trivium ranked and reviewed if it wasn't for my German Shepherd and additionally my French Bulldog interrupting this video. But I'm back. But yes, as I was saying, the level of melody, hooks, sentimental value from Shogun just can't be matched. And that's why, even though I find Court of the Dragon to probably going to be a great soundtrack to the end of this year, going into the holiday season, the same way other albums like Silence in the Snow or Sin in the Sentence had done. Shogun, of course, has that power too, and then just that growth that occurred after the Crusade and just proved how powerful they were as musicians. That's why I just give it the edge over Court of the Dragon. But let me say this about both Court of the Dragon and Shogun. Those are easily their best albums if you're like more of a traditional metalhead. You like your longer songs, you're less infatuated like I am about hooks. Not about dynamics per se, but just like, I don't know. I kind of like a blend where I like most of my album to be digestible, but then if there's a couple of longer tracks that are a little bit more fleshed out, I guess, then I guess that's where you can find the perfect marriage of Trivium's songwriting capabilities. But I do think Shogun and Court of the Dragon are incredible, as I do pretty much most or all Trivium albums. But moving on, their number 4 spot goes to Waves. Dun 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 dun. As I've called it before, basically Ascendancy and drop C sharp or a half step down. It's just such an evil sounding album, and we're back to talking about like kind of shorter, punchier songs that don't feel as long and just kind of really get to the point in a lot of ways. There's a lot of hooks on this album, a lot of dissonance and a lot of evil tones throughout this album. It just sounds super dark. Like just the bridge of In Waves, like, yeah, the hook of In Waves is awesome, even though it is one of their best songs. I do think it's kind of overplayed and overdrawn, but it is an incredible song, and the bridge and the solos are incredible also. But then you just got like Inception of the End, Dust Dismantled, that just really maintain that darkness and just that evil, like death metal core sound, but just it has like a bounce and a thrash simultaneously to it. So it's just a solid album overall. I talk more about it on the other video, but I just think that, 10 years of In Waves now, the album really really aged well, and it's just super easy to listen to from front to back. It is kind of like a perfect marriage, I'm using that term again, of like most of Trivium's sounds before Alex joined the band. Just enough melody in there to make it memorable, but it's mostly heavy and aggressive. Matt's vocals sound incredible on this one, the thrash and everything. I think In Waves might actually be their heaviest album, if I can be so bold. I think In Waves might be Trivium's heaviest album, and that's why I love it so much. But let's get to an album that I haven't talked about yet, and that is the number 3 spot, their 2020 release, What the Dead Men Say. To follow up Sin in the Sentence would certainly be really hard, but they definitely got momentum on this release, and I'd probably say the only reason this isn't their best album is it's too short. Yeah, it's their shortest album. It's only shorter than Vengeance Falls by like a few minutes, but Vengeance Falls sounds like it goes on longer. What the Dead Men Say kind of flies by. It's such an incredible album, and it definitely takes off. It gains momentum. It doesn't put its best foot forward first with the title track or Catastrophist. They're great songs, but it's when Amongst the Shadows and the Stones comes in with like that In Waves energy married to like that Sin in the Sentence energy, and then bleed into me that nasty bass tone, that drop G sharp. It's like a super heavy, super slow and chuggy and melodic all at the same time. It's just such a well-written, unique Trivium song. It's one of their best songs. And then to follow it up with like the Defiant, which has incredible vocal performance, memorable chorus. I stand in defiance of your wake. Like it just, because of the thrashy metalcore nature of the main riff, it reminds me of Ascendancy, but it's got like that modern Trivium sound behind it. The middle of the album is where it's actually not even just the middle, it's the back half of the album. Basically from Shadow and the Stones all the way to the end, it's just excellence, every single song. But Catastrophist also has a great chorus. It is a great song. Don't get it twisted, but it just picks up momentum towards the middle and just maintains it all the way up until the end. This has my second favorite Trivium song of all time, Sickness Unto You. The chorus, the intro, the post-chorus guitar solos, pretty much everything about that song is perfect. And that's why What the Dead Men Say definitely ranks towards the top. It's because while there's some Trivium albums that are just consistently great from start to finish, this one is consistently excellent from nearly start to finish. My only beef with it is it's just a little bit short, but there are iconic choruses and harmonies and melodies and Scattering the Ashes. Then it gets heavy again with Bending the Art to Fear. And then you get like a little bit of the Sin in the Sentence feel on the Ones We Leave Behind with that drum intro and just the parts of the chorus in a little bit. So like if you thought Sin in the Sentence and What the Dead Men Say was like a double album, which it's not, but I feel like what the Ones We Leave Behind is the perfect bookend to the beginning of Sin in the Sentence, that title track. So What the Dead Men Say was a excellent follow-up, great sophomore release with Alex Bent on the drums. And it was basically tied with the number 2 spot, which is Ascendancy. But I'm giving the slight edge to Ascendancy just because, come on, it's Ascendancy. That is one of the albums that made such a tremendous impact in my life. It's up there with Killswitch Engage's End of Heartache as albums that changed my life for the better and got me into like these cooler subgenres of metal. So you've heard me talk about Ascendancy quite a bit on the other video, but it's aged super well. End of Everything is their best, is to this day it's still their best instrumental album opener. Rain and Pull Harder, Drawn and Torn Asunder, that's just a trifecta of excellence right there. And then it picks up again with Gunshot to the Head of Trepidation, like Light the Flies. And even though Dying in Your Arms can be a little corny, just for the time, it's still aged pretty damn well. And then, it closes on a pretty high note with songs like Departure and Declaration. So Ascendancy is just a metalcore classic. It's Trivium showing their hunger and showing how incredible that they're going to be. And it's just so potent and the perfect definition of sophomore success. And again, just a classic, one of the crown jewels of mid-2000s metalcore. And that's why I give it the slight edge over What the Dead Men Say. But their best album, still, even with 2 more releases with Alex Bent, their best album to this day is still The Sin in the Sentence from 2017. Their 8th album, the one that reignited my love for this band. This is just, going to use the expression again, the perfect combination, the perfect storm of all the best parts of Trivium condensed into one album. It is just excellent from start to finish. I wouldn't even call them dips or anything, but my least favorite song on the album is one of the singles, Heart From Your Hate, but it's still a great song. Revankist Has Grown on Me. It's still not my favorite song, but it is a pretty epic song. But just the level of thrash in songs like Beyond Oblivion, Sever the Hand, Thrown Into the Fire. But the best tracks are Sin in the Sentence, the opening track. There's just a lot of heartfelt emotion that I have to that song. The nasty, groovy-ass drop G sharp tuning song, Wretchedness Inside, probably Trivium's heaviest song. And then one of my personal favorites, Beauty and the Sorrow. Just love that intro. I love that bridge. A lot of good memories to this album. So you want to hear more, be sure to check out the other video. But let's recap. From least favorite to most favorite, with a couple of slight changes from my previous ranking. And of course, we're adding 2 new albums. Vengeance Falls, Ember to Inferno, Silence in the Snow, The Crusade, In the Court of the Dragon, Shogun, In Waves, What the Dead Men Say, Ascendancy, and their best album is The Sin in the Sentence. And my 10 favorite Trivium songs are Breathe in the Flames from Silence in the Snow, In Waves, Beauty and the Sorrow from Sin in the Sentence, Throes of Perdition from Shogun, Bleed Into Me from What the Dead Men Say, Rain from Ascendancy, Wretchedness Inside, Sin in the Sentence from The Sin in the Sentence, Sickness Unto You from What the Dead Man Say and Pull Harder on the Strings of Your Martyr is still my favorite Trivium song to this day. The fucking guitar riffs on that, it's so fucking fun. The dual solo, like, you just cannot fuck with Pull Harder and Sickness Unto You, man. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Again, be sure to click the link in the video for the original video if you want to hear me talk about their first 8 albums more in length, but I mainly wanted to focus this one on a recap as well as more in-depth on their newest albums, which are both incredible. I love Trivium. They're one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time. They do not disappoint. And again, they are kind of in like their golden years right now because Matt Heafy is at like his vocal peak right now. He sounds as nasty on the screaming as he did on Ascendancy. The guitar playing is like top notch. They have their best drummer. Paulo sounds better with his clean vocals, and his bass tone is nasty. So I love Trivium, and be sure to comment what you agree and what you disagree with. How would you rank them differently? And are you pissed that I didn't rank Court of the Dragon or Shogun higher? I love those albums very much. It's just a personal preference thing. But at any rate, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.